All right, we're going to call the meeting to order. Butler,
Here.
McNabb. Here. Essing. Here. Fisher.
Here.
Ward. Here. Knopfinger.
Here.
Seaman. Here. All right, we're going to move on to visitors and correspondence, and we've got a lot to cover tonight. So we're just going to listen to what people have to say. There won't be any questions or answers or anything like that. And then if you have any questions for us later, you can contact one of us or Dr. Freeman. So I think we're starting with the tip.
Excellent. I guess that's me.
I mean, they're on.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm John Oliver with the City of Washington, Planning Development Director, and Ray Forsyth, our City Administrator here as well. So we certainly appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk about the TIF district and hopefully being able to extend the life of it for another 12 years. So just offering a really brief history in the background of it. The city actually established two TIF districts back in 1986, both the Square District that's in place right now, as well as another one kind of around the area centered around Business 24 in North Cummings, both established in 86, both for the statute limit of 23 years, ran through 2009. At that point, the desire was to extend the Square TIF, but allow for the Washington Road TIF to expire. And so 12 years ago, we came before each of the taxing bodies with that plan, and we were fortunate to have the support to move ahead with it and get the state legislative approval as a part of that too. Just roughly the square boundaries, and you may kind of already know this, but just to give you kind of the geography of what the square encompasses right now in terms of the TIF district. It's bordered roughly by Zinsser on the north, the TP&W Railroad tracks on the west, Burton on the south, and halfway between High and Elm Streets on the east. It's about 100 and I think the latest is 109 or 110 parcels roughly within that area. The current status of the TIF, right now we have around $1 million or so in the fund. It is very admittedly a very healthy fund, and we tried to have been very conservative in the use of those funds over the years. With that being said, the current fiscal year 21-22 and then 22-23 commitments that we have coming up, our fiscal year is a May 1 fiscal. About half of that is spoken for in terms of we have a streetscape grant application that we have submitted to IDOT for the hopeful, at least, renovation, streetscape improvements around the square. We expect an announcement to be made on the awards for that program sometime this spring by IDOT. That's roughly a $2 million project. We would be committed to 20% of that, so roughly $400,000 would be our match if we were successful in getting the grant. Obviously, we're hopeful that'll be the case. We did receive funds through this program a couple of years ago to complete the Phase 1 engineering for it. We had applied for at that time for both the Phase 2 engineering as well as the construction. We were only funded for the Phase 1 engineering, so now we're coming back hoping to be able to get the rest of the engineering as well as the construction funds for that. So again, if we do get that, we would be looking at completing the Phase 2 construction through the rest of this calendar year, and then we'd be looking at construction starting in the spring of next year and working its way through most of 2022. The other part, we have roughly a little over $100,000 right now designated for a couple of previously committed private redevelopment projects. And then, so those are the projects that we have committed thus far. We always have a fairly healthy supply of funds we like to keep for any possible redevelopment projects that may come about. Right now we have a few different projects that are kind of in the very early stages of possibly coming to fruition. Certainly there's nothing in place right now. All of those projects have to be approved by the City Council through an ordinance. But we're hopeful that there will be some projects. I would say probably the biggest one that we're looking at, and I'm kind of jumping ahead to the next slide that'll touch on this, is the southeast side of the square, and we have a couple of members I know that are on your board that are part of the Historical Society, but we have looked at that side of the square as kind of being what we would hope to be kind of a catalytic type of project to make the square more of a 24/7 destination than what it is right now, and have a restaurant or a brewery or some sort of use that would bring people to the square beyond kind of the typical 9 to 5 Monday through Friday hours. So certainly There is nothing in place with that right now. The Historical Society bought that building recently, and really any kind of project, whether it's with that building or others, would be up to the property owner to be able to make that happen. But certainly we want to be able to have the funds in place to be able to assist with that for some of those older buildings that would require that type of not only upkeep, but some of the necessary improvements to be able to accommodate that type of use in them. Again, we've been fairly conservative in the use of the funds over the years, which hopefully speaks to why we have the fund that we have right now. With really only a couple of exceptions, we have typically had a 20 to 40% subsidy share as a part of that. So the burden has most often been on either the property owner or the business owner to take on the remainder of the project, but we have typically committed 20 to 40% of those funds. And then I just put in a note here, since 2000, just going back in some of the more quote-unquote recent projects that we've had, there have been 53 different exterior and interior private redevelopment projects with an investment of a little shy of $6 million. Some of the future projects, and I would say kind of the reason for even considering an extension of the TIF district is maybe first and foremost that we're in the state of Illinois and there's frankly few economic development tools at our disposal. And so being able to have this that is fairly easy to educate people on, to be able to allow them to help with the renovation of older buildings. I'd like to think that our square TIF is kind of the epitome of what TIF was created for originally, and the fact that we have all these older buildings. I've indicated in the second bullet point here, the average age of the older buildings kind of on and immediately around the square, it was 1934. So there's always going to be that need to maintain them, whether there is a TIF incentive to be able to assist with that or not. That is always going to be out there. And something I think we're really looking at more so here very recently is just the competition from other greenfield sites and really the impact that e-commerce is having, not only on downtown squares, this is certainly common to all retail anywhere, but e-commerce, especially during COVID, has really had a profound effect on the operation and utilization of some of these older buildings that are for retail. And so we would love to be able to have an incentive to be able to keep those relevant, updated, not only to compete with the e-commerce businesses of the world, but the big boxes, the Walmarts, Menards, not to pick on them by any means. But I think one of the things that people are drawn to when they come to a city like Washington, beyond the quality of life and the great schools and things like that, but also having kind of an identifiable historic downtown that people can look at proudly. And so we want to be able to continue to be able to make that as much as possible. A couple other projects, and we don't have anything firmly in place yet, but I think one of the things that we hear about the most in terms of future projects around the square is trying to identify other public parking opportunities. We've actually purchased and redeveloped a couple different parking lots within the last 5 years. There's 3 other lots that we would be interested in being able to have an impact with, whether it be through a lease or the acquisition and then redevelopment of those lots. And so really in no particular order, we have a lot on the kind of the west side, on the south side of Zinser, that we would look at as more of a secondary type of employee parking type of lot that doesn't have probably as big an impact on public parking as the lot next to it that the city purchased a few years ago. But certainly there's always a need for employees to be able to park their cars too, and ideally not in prime parking spaces that would be more geared for their customers. We have a parking lot that is currently owned by WRC on the northeast side that the city may acquire, and that could be a reconstruction project as well. And then a parking lot that the city actually purchased a few years ago to the south of the Danforth building, on the southeast side of the square. That was originally intended for public parking, but if you ever drive through that anytime, certainly on a weekday, you will see that most of the cars that are in that lot are typically either post office employees or their customers. And ideally, we'd like to come up with a plan that shifts those cars to the opposite side of the street on the east side of High Street and then free up that parking for public parking like it was originally intended for. But again, there's certainly nothing in place for those. Some of these projects can take years to really come to fruition, but we keep open dialogues on all those projects, hoping that we can get something that can move pretty quickly. The last bullet point on here is kind of an unknown at this point, but we do know that Business 24 is going to be reconstructed. It's a matter of when, not if. We're figuring it's going to be within the next few years. IDOT did announce it in their 5-year plan in the fall of 2019, but they have not gone out for bids yet for the engineering for that project. The engineering itself is going to be a 2-year process, so we figure by the time they actually get that in place, best case we're probably looking at is 23 for the construction. We know that we will have some infrastructure costs on the city's end for that, so the TIF can certainly assist with some of that infrastructure that would be within the boundaries. What we've kind of proposed to each of the taxing bodies is to kind of balance the desire to be able to offer this incentive for another 12 years with the financial realities that each of the taxing bodies are under, knowing that certainly there is some property tax revenue that is diverted that you would ordinarily receive if not for the TIF. We completely understand that. And so what we would propose is to remove a little bit more than half of the existing parcels from the square, which right now amounts to a little bit more than half of the existing annual increment, which is around $116,000. And then so keeping the primary parcels in and immediately around the square, which is 50 parcels. The other, and I'll jump ahead real quick to this map to kind of show it in a little bit more detail. The parcels shown in yellow would be the ones that we would propose to keep within the TIF. Again, those are the ones that are primarily around the square that we would figure would have the biggest impact in being able to have the TIF incentive in place for another 12 years. The ones in the red crosshatch are the parcels that are currently in the TIF that we would propose removing, again, kind of more on the periphery. The ones in green, the Park District had approached us when we were originally talking to them about the possibility of getting their support. They had pitched the idea of including the future Gordon Park property, which is the parcel on the far west side of that map, on the west side of the TP&W viaduct. The intention is for that to be a park owned by the Gordon family, and they have been fundraising for the last couple of years to try to assist with some of the work there. They had approached the city about the possibility of including that in the TIF to be able to possibly assist with some of the infrastructure that could be a part of it. Our response was we could, however, in order to do so, it would still need to pass the TIF Act requirement that it be contiguous to the boundaries of the rest of the square. So you'll notice obviously that parcel is not contiguous as it currently stands, and so in order to have that parcel in the TIF, we would then have to add the other 2 parcels immediately to the east, which are on the east side of the viaduct. So if that were to be considered, what we would propose as well as is the parcels in purple, which are the other parcels as you go further east on Business 24. We would look to keep those in the TIF. However, there would be none of that property tax would actually be collected in the TIF. We would declare a surplus so that all the property tax would continue to go back to each of the taxing bodies proportionally as it does currently, at least for the parcels in green. The parcels in purple, you would then receive all that proportional property tax. The potential issue that we see with it as the city is if there was the support for an additional 12 years, one of the requirements would be to amend our redevelopment plan for it. And one of the requirements for a TIF district is that you meet the state's blighted, quote unquote, tests for it. And while I think a pretty good case could be made for the park property and it being considered blighted, certainly there were a number of smaller residential units there as of a couple of years ago that were torn down, and the parcel itself is really doesn't lend itself to much other use other than a park because it's low-lying and in the floodplain. The other 2 parcels may be a little bit tougher to meet that test, so we've tried to be careful in over-promising anything in the Park District, but just want to be as transparent as we can as to why those parcels are going on there. So that's really about it. I don't know if Ray wants to add anything. Otherwise, we can certainly take any questions that you may have.
Yeah, I think just to kind of reiterate what John was saying is to show a good faith effort to the taxing bodies, we propose taking half of it back out. And I came from Moline. We had 13 TIF districts, very similar process. as they've done here, we're very conservative with TIFs. We didn't TIF residential properties, which really hurts school districts. And our downtown is what draws people to Washington, not only to shop, but also to live here. And we think having the downtown continue to be successful is a really key part of our economic development efforts for the city. And if without the TIF district, we're going to see a lot less reinvestment downtown. And the last thing we want are vacant storefronts in our downtown. So from our perspective, as John said, there are no other options for us through the state of Illinois. They just don't have incentive programs. They can't afford it. They rely on the communities to use TIF and other funds. And so we think this is a really important part of our plan moving forward. Giving up that $116,000 gives you that money starting next year as soon as the TIF expires. And then the difference when we declare a surplus is those properties will be in the TIF. So you'll get your the base allotment, and then every year we'll declare a surplus, and that money will come in separately than the TIF funds. So it shouldn't go against your school aid formula, because we're declaring that surplus and you're going to get that in a separate, basically a separate check from the county because it's declared surplus rather than it being regular TIF funds. So we think that's an advantage to the school district as well. So from my perspective as a city administrator, my goal is to make sure that we continue to get private investment. And as John said, the businesses are putting 60 to 80% of their own money into these properties. The city's putting in the last half, and it's typically to balance it out. So the cost of rehabbing an old building is a lot higher than new construction is, and meeting the building codes is a challenge for a lot of these property owners. So the TIF is really the only tool that these property owners have, other than taking on more debt themselves. So like John said, we can answer any question. Hopefully gain your support so that we can move forward with this. It still has to go to the Illinois legislature. There's a couple other communities that are doing the same thing that we are. TIF is always a challenge everywhere in the state of Illinois. There's TIF districts in, I think, every state except for either Alaska or Arizona, one of the two A's, that don't have TIF districts. So it's a common tool. We're trying to conform to make all our taxing districts as whole as we can with this process, and hopefully you understand that we're not doing it because we can, we're doing it because we think we need to.
Anyone from the board have any questions?
I have one that isn't directly aligned with this, but we are 4 different districts here. We're not a unit district, and I know you've met with the 52 board, I believe.
Right.
Have 50 and 51 also been educated about this?
We have not approached them. 50 and 51 are not a part of the TIF district, so we have not approached them as a part of it.
Yeah, they don't get any revenue one way or the other from that part of it.
Good to know.
Any other questions?
So, mine is more of a statement than a question, but I've been on 52 and this board for 12 years. So, and over the life of this TIF, those 2 districts have paid several million into it ultimately, which didn't go to the schools and the kids, etc. So you're asking us to be a partner, but the city has repeatedly over these last 12 years occasionally not worked as a partner with the schools. For example, when the mayor says over and over again in the newspaper, unprovoked, if you look down the street, they're the ones who are taking your property taxes. Actually, the city is taking our property taxes. We do not have the opportunity to increase revenues. We have no leverage to do revenues. You guys do. You can increase taxes, you can increase fees, etc. So I think that's not, I support what you're saying about the TIF. I love the downtown. I live North Main Street. I doubt I would have moved to Washington if the square weren't there. So I love everything you're doing, lots of great ideas, but in terms of a partnership, I find it frustrating that the mayor will work against the school sometimes with criticizing us for taking the money that is ours. And,
Agreed.
and so I just think, if you want us to work as partners, it would work if we all worked together and we didn't criticize each other for trying to gain revenue to run town, city, I guess, or the school district. So, because 2000, I mean, I just did a ballpark number, this isn't correct, but I'm pretty sure the TIF has probably taken about $2 million of the high school's revenue. I mean, this would be a different room, for example, which would be much more functional for students. We could have more teachers, we could have more administrators being able to better interact with students. So when we give this money to you, we're really giving you things that would go to the kids of the town. And to be, every year, a couple times, to be told, to have the mayor tell the city, all the people in the newspaper, everybody in the Journal Star readership, well, we don't take, it's not us that's taking your property tax, it's the school down the street. I don't find that respectful, I don't find that to be a partnership, and it's really frustrating. So, that's how I feel, and I think you can understand that.
Well, and obviously, you know, John and I don't represent the mayor or the council. You know, we're here as public servants to the city. And I don't mean this to be facetious, but the challenge is if the TIF wasn't there, that $2 million might not have ever materialized either. So the TIF is creating economic development outside of the TIF district. So by investing in the downtown, people are also investing in the community. So, you know, we may not have grown by 10 or 15% over those years had we not had a successful downtown. So, but for the TIF, people may not have invested elsewhere in town. And obviously that doesn't solve your problem. But I think the ultimate response is the TIF helps the rest of the community in other ways outside of the TIF. So, you know, I think you could look at studies and we may not have had 200 houses built in Washington because people come here because of the square. They come here because our square is full of unique shops that people want to
They
be
come here
in.
because of the schools.
Are you part of the school board?
No, but they come here because of the schools.
They also come here because of the community, so the opportunity. So you know, I totally understand your point, and we can relay the message back to the mayor, you know, that that's the
Well,
response we
and-
got.
Yeah, and I'm just, not to correct you, Brian, but Brian does not speak for the entire board in that sentiment. I don't think this is the place to criticize the mayor necessarily, and comments he's made. I don't think you gentlemen have made comments to that effect. So, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, in my opinion.
Well, it is, but it's, and it's true, I speak for myself, but I am a member of the board, and as a member of the board, I support the TIF, I like the TIF, I completely understand it brings a lot of gains. It looks like you've built the TIF in a very considerate way this time. I appreciate that too. But I just think the city would work well, like it or not, you guys are the city and we're the board. If we can support each other, that would be the best thing, not criticize each other for trying to make money that we need to make to run the schools or the city.
Right, and I think Kyle and Joe can both say when I first got here, I came, met with all the superintendents and all the, you know, all the school people that I could, because I'm a strong believer in partnerships and collaboration. So
Absolutely.
from a staff perspective, we support everything the school does.
Appreciate that.
Okay, anything else?
We have met several times over.
A real quick comment. This initially was presented to the finance committee, so one thing that was discussed in there that wasn't completely thought here is the previous TIF cost the district annually about $72,000, where the new proposal would be approximately $35,000 to $40,000 a year. So, just perspective so that everybody hears those numbers.
I was going to ask that very thing, so.
It's an estimate, so no,
Yeah, these are just
totally
all
over to
latest,
it, but
yeah,
just some
2019
perspective of how much money we're
Right,
talking
right.
about.
All right.
That was it.
No, then that's helpful, actually. So, all right, anything else?
Just that with tax caps too, we do look at these carefully, making our dollars stretch as much as we can to take care of our students. So it's all here to be evaluated and considered. and with the full knowledge that you're sharing all the details with us to consider. Yes.
Well, we appreciate the time in front of you
Thank
this
you.
evening and are always here. If you have any questions outside of this meeting, feel free to contact either one of us and we can get back to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the history. This was educational.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can just leave it. Thanks, John.
All right, do we have any other visitors or correspondence? Having none, we'll move on to action items. First action is to approve the bills. Do I have a motion to approve the bills? Second. Anything else? All right, roll call please. Dickman?
Here.
Ward?
Yes.
Montaner? Yes. Over?
Yes.
Seaman?
Yes.
McNabb?
Yes.
Hessen? Yes. All right, and then the second action item is to approve the SRO proposal, which we discussed a couple of times now, but we're ready to approve that.
What kind of threw it off is there's some legislation sitting at the state level that, depending on how things go, there have been some campaigns to potentially move SROs out of school districts. I'm not saying that that's going to pass, but I'm working with Jay Greening to put a clause in the contract, which would be kind of an exit clause. We have it in our basic contract, our bargain agreement with the union. It basically just says if anything changes in legislation, then the contract itself would change as well, based on those changes. So as soon as I get that from him, I can sign off on the contract. But basically, we're looking at a 2.5% increase for the SRO for next year. I'd like to go ahead and approve establishing the contract. You've seen everything but that one clause. So I can send that out as soon as I get it from Jay. But that's all that clause will say. It just basically will state, if anything changes legislatively, we won't be held accountable. If they say that you can no longer have an SRO in school, that'll basically void the contract. That's the purpose behind it. I don't think the city, and I've had conversations with Chief McCoy, I don't think the city would hold us to it. It's just a cleaner way to do that. So just so you know, it's more or less having the clean language in there that accomplishes the task of it.
Could I ask the rationale on the part of the state for the change?
Problems that have happened up in Chicago. That's the best way I could put it. I think there's a feeling in more urban areas. We've had a really good relationship with our SRO, but there have been cases that are a little tougher up in some of the more urban areas where students have been arrested or been taken into question in a school building, and it's tied to the SRO, and that's where some of the frustration, I think, comes from. But we've managed to hold a good line between the way we operate with our police department and our SRO. We haven't had any of those issues here.
So, handle it statewide, huh?
Well, we often run into.
Oh, I know we do, I know, but it's always nice to at least know the rationale.
As I mentioned, there's still a pretty significant amount to go. Based the legislation that's sitting there right now, I read today, just from the House alone, I think there are 89 bills that are sitting out there that would change the school code. Understand, the vast majority of them won't pass. And that could likely be one of them that doesn't pass. And those that do pass will not look as they do right now. So we know there's a lot that has to happen before any of that is fully approved.
So,
I was just going to ask a question. So I just want to understand. So we're not approving the hiring. I mean, it's a tentative approval, right?
We would approve it once we get that. So
The
it's
language.
approved, the rest of the contract will be approved as is with the addition of language that would allow us out if legislation changes the function of an SRO in the school district.
Okay, and I just want to make sure, because we do have an action item, and we are going to approve something. But
Yes.
we're approving you to go forward with that language included in the contract.
Yes.
Okay.
And once that language is in there, then I can sign off on it, the chief will sign off on it. It'll be solid then. It's approving.
So Brad, a question on that, if that legislation was passed, that might void some aspects of the contract anyway?
It could, I mean,
So we just feel more comfortable with approving this with the language.
just to be clear, so there's no confusion over it, we're not arguing over it. I don't
Right.
think we would argue it over it, but it just makes it clear for both parties.
Right, okay.
And as I mentioned, I have reached out to the city, they've already said that we wouldn't argue over it, but we would both like, if I walk out and get hit by a bus and Chief McCoy decides, then other people would at least have that. Well, there are a lot of buses. They're big and yellow, you would think I could avoid that, so that's my goal.
Right, school bus, so, school bus. Okay, so we need a motion to approve it with the language to be added
Yes.
from Jay
Yes.
within the food website.
Yeah.
So moved with the appropriate action.
Okay.
Second.
Motion second. Anything else? All right, roll call, please.
Essing,
Yes.
Ward. Yes. Fisher,
Yes.
Knopfinger.
Yes.
Seaman. Yes. Butler.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, motion passes. On to number 5, discussion items. So we're going to go over the district goals for 2021 and 22 school year. Dr. Freeman, I'd like to start with some things we've talked about regarding what I think should set on our goals and what shouldn't, because while we're reviewing this. A lot of these, I've been doing some research, and we've talked about this, it's not new. A lot of these goals have been sitting here for maybe as many as 5 years. Not that we haven't accomplished them, we just feel like they're really good to have somewhere. I don't think they should be sitting on our goals. And we've talked about a couple of options as to where those might set, maybe as a charge for the committee. I'm open to any suggestion. I just think that, there's a lot of goals we've accomplished and we move them off, and, the dashboard is one, we accomplished it, we maintain it, we keep up with that practice, but it's no longer a goal. So I guess as we're going through this, I'd like everyone to think about what goals need to actually stay as a goal, and possibly where they could set so we don't lose sight of them, but yet they're not, like I said, then someone might think we haven't accomplished these, and we have a lot of them. So I just wanted to say that because I'm assuming you're going to kind of go through these and we can discuss if they belong here or if they belong in maybe another format. All right.
And so some of the conversation that we've had would be, each of our committees exists. So we have a facilities committee. Instead of putting some of the language into the goal itself, Lisa, I have a bunch of copies. Instead of putting the language into the goal itself, maybe what we need to do is develop basically a definition, a charge for each of the committees, and we could include some of that language in there, which does make good sense, because instead of rehashing the same goals over and over again, then we're looking at, this is the expectation of the facility, which would be good for new board members coming on, somebody that gets into a new committee for the first time. It's something we can hand to them that says, here is the task for your committee. So I do think there's a lot of...
And it will end up pulling quite a bit on here, but we've got a lot to accomplish this year with coming up with COVID anyway, so I don't feel too bad if this is a little sparse, and we might have, I don't know if you have any other suggestions, but I think it's a smart idea. If anyone, I don't know if anyone have any thoughts we want to discuss, whether or not we even think this is a good idea before we move forward with this.
I just had a question about a component. Then would the tracking as we advance toward those goals and our reporting come from committee rather than a board presentation?
Well, I think these goals are really, we've already accomplished them. So I guess if we lose, what you're saying, if we get off track.
Now, if we move it to the committee,
Oh.
to the committees, then would the tracking of our progress and the reporting to the board be done through the committee structure rather than just board reports in general?
It could be. The committee could also, we could do it any number of ways. That's a great question, Mrs. McNatt. It could be done by a committee report that comes back to the board. It could also be something that comes into a bigger, like, state of the state report that I provide annually, which I'm going to do something along that lines traditionally anyway. So there are a number of ways we could address that as we move forward. I do understand what you're saying. I think some of what she's talking about will be things that aren't so much tracked goals, but expectations. So
I think our finance goals would be a really good example. I think Joe, pretty much when he does his reports, makes sure we're working within what our goal recommends. So I would think Joe would call attention to us if for some reason we weren't doing one of these.
So with that being said, why don't we start
Let's
with
start, yeah,
finance,
maybe we'll make
and then we have an example to work from.
Okay.
I think that would.
I have one thing I want to add into that. So as I've went through these goals, over the years, we've had a lot of really good goals and we accomplished quite a few of them. But we kind of, for the history of people coming in, they kind of lost it. Like I'll use the communication example. We brought communication on. We really worked with communication back and forth with the public and teachers and students and parents. Somewhere we need to make sure we know why we did that and how we did it, so that we're not repeating it, say in 15 years, somebody's going to say, well, how come we didn't do anything with communication? So I don't know if we have, and you, Dr. Freeman, probably had the goals over the year of where you got
Yes.
from that. So maybe you could incorporate that with it too.
Yeah.
It's not too cumbersome.
I think that.
Is that what
that
you're
is-
trying to say, is kind of make that document?
Well, that is something I've talked about also, but for today's purposes, I think mostly, like I said, our finance goals, we've been doing this now for several years. It's not, we're not trying to achieve something. But yeah, it would be nice to document once they are accomplished and then they become more of just a common practice versus, like our communications, I think we've done a lot with that. It's not a goal anymore, it's just a kind of we keep up that practice.
It's, yeah. And
Does that answer your
I
question?
think,
Yeah.
Dr. Sander, do you mind going to the finance
Yeah,
goal?
let's dig
Let's
in.
start there. Because I think we're talking about kind of this first statement. The district will sustain the Illinois State Board of Education's financial recognition status so that we continue to have financial strength necessary to support excellent educational, co-curricular, and extracurricular opportunities for our students, staff, and community. That's a goal, but that could also be a charge to the committee. The committee is charged with, all of that. And so that's why I think it helps to kind of see what we're targeting. The sub-goals then become finance goals, right? Potentially. So the Finance Committee will work with the administration to ensure the FY22 fiscal year ends with an operating fund surplus and a strong operating expense to revenue ratio while maintaining adequate reserve cash balances. Ideally, 180 days cash on hand in the operating funds combined. So that's potentially, if we want a goal in that area, that would be there. That could also be used as a charge as well, though. Because I do think that one of the things we did coming in was we wanted to establish some structure, and I don't think that it's something you want to let fall off the table. I think it needs to exist. I think it needs to exist somewhere, and that we're constantly monitoring these things. So,
I think this is a great idea because I've thought for a while that pretty much, for example, all of our finance goals are in fact not a goal. A goal is something that you should set and achieve, and then you achieve it and you move it off the table. I think pretty much everything in finance is something that is really an operating principle, which as such should be in the committee charge. So I totally agree. And I think realistically what's going to happen is it's going to shift what our goals look like. I mean, I think we're going to have less finance goals, less facilities goals, and more programs and student success goals probably. Unless we, like the footprint for the athletic fields might end up being a facilities goal, for example. But I like it because it's going to focus us on trying to achieve something and moving off the table.
And if we lose sight of these, then we bring it back on. So if we, as a goal.
Right, but at least for the finance, the first two finance goals have some measurability to them, because if you can't track a goal or know when you're there, and there's something tangible with the first two sub-goals. The third sub-goal of working with the administration in order to optimize opportunities for fiscal efficiency. That's absolutely important, but there's no there's no way to measure that, and we have to do that every year, or we're not doing, the community justice.
And
I
honestly,
agree.
believe it or not, the board didn't used to do these things. I mean, when it was a goal, it was a goal. I mean, we worked towards this for the people who work. Am I correct on that? I mean,
Well, I think they
We're doing a much
they
better
just
job.
didn't
Right,
articulate it very, I don't think it was put into a position where people understood that that was part of the
Right.
goal of the board. And so by utilizing this format for the past several years, that's what we've done. We've been communicating with the public that this is a goal of this district.
Very honestly, until about the last 5 years, Fred, you can attest to this or not, it was just a great big list that wasn't tracked, wasn't accounted. I mean, it was just a big list, potpourri. This is our first attempt to really put something together that had an organized format, that we could measure our progress, that really had, it's a structure we never had before. So I think it's fine to keep it pertinent, but this alone was a great step forward. So now we can look at it and say, is it working? Could it work better?
So it seems like, if we're gonna try to do this tonight, I'm just listening and just to move it forward. It sounds like a charge would be an operating principle, and then a goal would be something measurable, and that we're able to complete and move off of the table. Is that about a good definition? That sounds.
Goal and objectives.
Well, I think part of what you might want to consider doing here, because a lot of these things are established by committee, I think you need to move it. We need to establish goals for next year, but maybe one of the goals that sits out there is we need to do the committee work necessary to disaggregate what we want to keep as a school goal and what we want to move to a different area. So I guess my suggestion would be, don't necessarily try to rewrite all of this tonight, because we will be here past midnight. That's a lot of work, and we have a committee structure to do just that, to go through each goal and say, here's what we think as a committee needs to be established. So I think part of what the board might determine here is, do you want to assign some things to committee to look at? We're going to approve some goals tonight, and if you really look at what we're doing, these things, finance goals, a lot of this is operation, and that's why
and that's why I brought that up
this
at
all
the beginning, and I don't want to
started.
hold this up, but I think a couple of these could be, and probably a little bit facilities could be pushed back to the committee, and they could decide if they like that. I think it personally makes sense. Like I said, I went back, I think I brought this up a couple years ago and just have not really, they're good philosophies. They're good to keep around, but I just don't think sitting on goals. And I like what Brian says, where then we can really focus our goal on some of the other things.
Why couldn't you, on sub-goal 3, I know you said really it's very important, but it's not really measurable in quotes. Why couldn't you put that in with the committee charge?
Absolutely. That's where I think it belongs.
Yeah, just put that in the committee chart and then leave these sub-1 and
Approve it
sub-2
for this
alone.
year, or do you just want to assign it back? Because there are some things that we have to have as goals this year.
Oh,
Okay, so Jennifer was just asking me what to do with next step. I think my one concern would be I don't necessarily want to peel too many goals out to where it looks like we don't have any goals going into next year. So I'd almost suggest if we keep this structure in place for one more year while we analyze how to move forward with it, I think that might be.
Did you understand what I was
approach.
saying, though, to put goal 3 in with the community charge?
Yes. But
Because it's not measurable in quotes.
right.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what Mandy said.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does everybody think? Do we want to just leave it alone with the idea that next year we put it back here, or would we like to just?
Were we approving the goals?
Not tonight.
Oh.
We can have some more and I'm sorry, to kind of it's something we've been talking about, but as I looked this over, I thought it might be nice to clean this up a bit.
I think it's a good idea to do this. I think it makes the most sense to put it to the committees and let the committees define their own charge by looking at these goals. So I think the best thing to do is to complete these goals like we normally would under ours, because that's what we're good at, right? We're good at this. And then this year, what we're going to do is each committee looks over the goals and defines their own charge. The board approves those committee charges. And then next year for goal setting, we redo the goals and have the committee charges in place. That's what I think makes the most sense.
And I think at that point in time, each committee can look at things and say, hey, we really need a goal in this area, then that's brought back to the board. As
Instead of feeling we have to have a goal in all these areas, because we don't necessarily every year, if we're doing okay with finance or facilities, we don't have to have a goal every year. Okay, so we're going to just,
But it won't be approved tonight,
Right.
but this is the discussion item before the approval in March, because I think the original goal of the board was to approve a set of goals prior to the election so that there is a set of goals in place as a new board comes on.
and that's what I'd like this to be, at least documented before the new board, because I think that everyone here kind of understands what we're talking about. So, all right, I'm done on that topic. We can move forward. As we're looking at these, I just wanted people to see if they agree with the idea of putting this as kind of a committee charge.
So, Lisa, maybe one thing we need to put down is that there will be action items in place at the next board meeting to look at or to assign each of these to their various committees so that they can be evaluated.
I think that's a great idea. Decide whether it's a goal or it's just a committee charge. Okay.
If that's okay with them.
Is everyone in agreement with that? Okay, all right. So now we can-
With that being said, does anybody have any problems with the one change to the finance goal?
I think we've shown support.
In case anybody's wondering, the change to the finance goal is it needs to be the correct fiscal year. So, and that's why a lot of that conversation occurred. Okay, so facilities goals. As you can see, as we went through this, we talked a little bit about some of the things that have happened. Sub-goal 1, which was completely lined out, the administration will work with the maintenance staff and Board of Education to address facility needs arising from the COVID-19 global pandemic. We took that out because we have already established what we needed for facility needs. We had all that in place in order to make sure things were operating now. A lot of that went to technology. You do see some plexiglass around in areas and other mitigation efforts to try to maintain safe distance and location. So tape on floors, things like that. We didn't have to do a lot of overarching repairs to the school because we utilized our plan to establish a lot of the protective measures instead of trying to do it through physical changes to the building. Sub-goal 1 then would become the administration will continue to work with the facilities committee on an annual basis. And everybody can read it, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but that's a traditional one. It's basically making sure that we have what we need for summer upgrades. We know what our list is, what we'll be working on. The other thing that sits there is continuing to maintain a standard for a process for significant capital projects in excess of $250,000. That does work. We had one put into play, or one request come in this year that then went to Finance Committee, so we know that it works. Any questions with sub-goal 1? Do you want me to go through them all and then talk, or do you want me to go one at a time?
I like one at a time.
Okay. So, any thoughts on sub-goal 1?
Again, that's one we've had quite a while.
Yes, and that could easily become a charge. That's what the committee decides. Sub-goal 2, the Board of Education Administration District Architect will work together, and you see what's lined out, to develop a long-range footprint plan for Babcock Field and a plan to address safety concerns as well as improvements for the south entrance to Torrey Gym. just so you know, we'll have all that in place. We need to get with the facility committee again to go through what has been given to us by the architect, and then we can start to move. We have a lot of this done. We're going to complete this goal by the end of the year is what I'm telling you. We're about 75, 80% complete now. We need to go through some more phases of just looking at things and make sure people are comfortable. The overall goal being that we're going to have a larger plan in place, okay? And so we'd like to change that to this year, begin working on the urgent items for the 10-year health life safety plan, and begin the first phase of the HVAC replacement plan. Those would be our goals for this year, which we do have a number of urgent items that we have to work on. We talked about those southern doors to the Torrey Gym, that whole area. That's an urgent goal. Fire alarm systems, we've talked about that. Those are urgent goals, so those are the things that we're discussing.
Aren't the urgent items things that need to be completed within 1 year?
Yes,
So instead of saying begin, should it say complete?
we can, yeah, absolutely.
So complete purpose.
Complete.
What is so complete the urgent items?
Yes.
And then, are we going to complete the first phase of the HVAC replacement plan?
Yes. that
As
is-
well as complete, so both of those?
Yep.
Any other concerns about that? Cool. Questions? All right, I guess we can talk about sub-goal 3.
The administration, this one's the new one that kind of replaced the one we knocked out in one. The administration will work with the maintenance department to review the designated fund categories and update equipment costs. The way that's designed is to, as we designate funds, the purpose is to try to get to where 80% of anything, so if a boiler goes down, or if the HVAC system as outlined in that document goes down, we have 80% of it available at the end of that. Well, you also have to take into account that as we move forward, things get a little more expensive. So from time to time, we have to go back through and reevaluate that document to make sure that our estimation of what the cost is will be accurate. We all know that buying a car 10 years ago was a lot cheaper than it is now. So we have to account for that as we move forward, and this is a good year to kind of analyze that and update.
So does that also include the new software that we've been working on, or is that just totally not?
Yes.
Okay, so the maintenance department designated fund categories, updated Christmas cost with the software, I mean.
Well, this is bigger than just that piece. This is that whole document. So
Okay.
the 375,000 that we allocate into the funds, it's that divides it by shell, by roof, by.
Right, well, I didn't know
So-
if you wanted that software, because that's a pretty big piece of the puzzle, if you wanted that in there somehow.
We already
You
have it.
already have it, you're
Yeah.
already done with it? Okay, so you don't, the only other suggestion is I'd ask that you put the facilities committee in that line, because right now it's got the administration and
Okay.
maintenance, so the facilities committee does need to review that, because we need to do it.
Okay. So I'll put the facility committee, I'll use basically,
Administration,
Yeah.
facility.
It's just like the one it says up above it, the.
Yeah.
yes. The administration and
On an
maintenance
annual-
department will work with the facilities committee.
And usually that's an annual event.
I'll just
But I
clean it up so
think
it's
this is not,
grammatically
Okay.
correct.
this is not just, and this one though, I think is a little more in-depth. Is that, he's getting
Yeah.
more updated bids,
Yeah.
is what I think, so.
This is
So it
not
may
an
not be our,
annual.
a regular annual.
Okay.
This would be a good example of something that would show up periodically as a goal. Because
I guess we
we
remember
would need
being
to do
prices
it.
on some of those
Well, that's true.
items. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's key.
Should we have something in there about our plan with the Vatican field and the, and the front of the tourism, as far as we can?
That's all going to be part of that big
It's all
10-year
rolled in
plan.
there? Okay.
So,
So you don't need to mention it per se then?
correct.
Okay.
It should, what we want to be able to do is try to feather some of that into that big 10-year plan that's kind of designed around the HLS,
Okay.
but it includes Babcock and it
It includes
includes
that. All right.
Torrey and it, yes. So,
Anything else on that? voted? Or otherwise?
Yeah, I would just compliment Facilities Committee on sub-goal 3. That's a great one. It's nicely done.
Okay, so what do you have?
Okay, programs and services. As you can see, basically everything was lined out. Yes, it is. So we're kind of revamping the goal. Realistically, what we are looking at based on what has happened over the course of this year is we need some time to kind of evaluate some things. So we will assess curriculum taught during the hybrid schedule in the 2021 school year to determine gaps in student knowledge. That's one of the first things we need to figure out. So that's the crux of what you see here. The sub-goals will outline how we plan on doing that. So I'm going to jump ahead and go through the sub-goals real quick because I think they play too tightly into the main goal. The administration will work with the faculty to develop and implement assessments of student knowledge and a plan to remediate curriculum not taught during the hybrid schedule in 2020-2021. Okay. The administration, that's sub-goal 1. 2, administration will work with the faculty to identify students at risk of graduation due to failures during the 2021 FY21 school year. I'm just going to make that easier because too many 20s. And create a plan for remediation of failed courses. And then sub-goal 3, the administration will work with the faculty to develop a PD plan that will provide support to teachers to achieve this goal. Okay, that's a lot to it, but basically what we need is some time to go through, figure out what, if any, or how much we lost over the course of this year that we need to make up for, and then how we are going to make up for it. That's what those goals are generally saying. And then provide support to teachers to be able to provide what they need to feather some of that in. So if in algebra, if there's a concept that we know we didn't get as much of it as we have in the past, when they move into geometry, we may need to feather that concept into instruction. So how do we do that? And that's where this is all laid at. Okay?
A lot of data gathering.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of evaluation in this. We have to evaluate, and I think we could slide. We're currently working with the staff now and the department chairs. We asked if they would go back and talk to each of their departments about lessons learned. What have we found as we've moved into this year? What has been very effective that we want to keep? What might we want to lose? What might we do differently as we move forward? Because we're in a unique situation right now. There's been a reset hit on education. So what we had to do is we have taken our curriculum and put the base foundation in place. So we've worked hard on the skeleton of what we do, our basic structures. Now as we get more time, how do we want to fill that out? Okay, what do we want that to look like? How can we better move our students forward? And so that's some of the conversation that's going to have to occur. It's very detailed, it's very deep conversation that happens not just at the department level, but at the actual class level. So the algebra teachers need to sit down and spend time talking. U.S. history, English 2. I mean, I can go through all of them. Spanish 1. You get where I'm going with this. They need to be able to spend some time to work together to figure out where are we, what do we want to do from here to improve? Because if we found out that there were things in there that the students didn't need so much of, and we're going to find some of that too. Some of what we took out was good information, but maybe we need to streamline it a different direction so that we can move further and faster.
We don't have a lot of time to catch them up either.
No.
So this sounds really good on paper. How is it going to be measurable though? How are you going to know that you're successful in doing that?
Well, the first thing that it says is develop and implement an assessment of student knowledge. That's how it's measured. Okay, then the second one is come up with a plan, create a plan for remediation of courses. So if we develop that plan, which we're working on, then we've succeeded in that goal. And then develop a PD plan. So all of those are measurable because did we accomplish the task we were assigned to do?
Well, I guess I'm just looking at the students, how are you gonna know if the student's successful, I guess, other than if they passed the class and done the tests and know the knowledge?
Yeah, and so part of what we have to figure out is, based on what we've done in the past and where we are, how do we evaluate where the kids are at when we get to the end of this year? How do we evaluate where kids are at the beginning of next year as new eighth graders come on board? To determine, okay, are there things that they need to be remediated in because of change in programming at the elementary levels? You know, this had an impact on all education at all levels. So that's where we need some time to be able to discuss how are we going to assess and evaluate that. And that's what we need to be able to articulate as we get into here.
We talked a little bit about, and I don't really see anything here, but I think that's kind of what you're saying, like some takeaways.
Yeah.
What worked well, do we need a goal, or do we need something that identifies, could they bring back some things? I know even in the transition team, a few of the teachers have commented, there's some things they liked and didn't like, and is that something we want to put here to
I mean, you
have
can,
something
but
brought back to the board of
It's
any
early.
recommendations that they
you
made?
can, but it becomes so individualized. You're looking at, you could be looking at, if we offer 170 different courses, you're looking at 170 evaluations, which that's way too deep for what the board should be doing. I don't mean that in a bad way, but that is a lot of information that would come here, and honestly, you'd sit at a board meeting and gloss over.
Well, I guess I wasn't thinking it'd all come back to us, but is that something, is there a process that you're going to be putting in place
Yes.
to get this information, not necessarily to be brought back to us, but possibly brought to? And
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a goal, I just didn't know if that's something we wanted to.
We are doing that right now.
Okay.
Okay, so we've already started that conversation, and it'll grow as we move forward, because it's that whole piece about what do we do here. I'm okay with putting a goal in, but I don't know what that looks like to be measurable, because I think it's going to depend on the class. Some of our classes we may find, we need to, like AP, we're not going to add anything because it's expected of us already. That's part of the curriculum they give us. And dual credit, we have to follow ICCs for that. So that's where it just.
I mean, I'm glad to hear you're doing it, I guess I just was hoping,
Now, some of the bigger ticket items that they were talking about at facilities committee, or not, at transition committee, I think that was different than what I'm talking
Okay.
about now. It's not so much a curriculum conversation at that level. It's more along the lines of what they've learned about how they can leverage technology. Or I'm sure there are going to be some other things they want to talk about. And I don't want to jump into it now, because I do think that part of what we're going through in another angle is going to address all of that, and we'll talk about that later. So, there are things I
I
can
mean,
say.
yeah, I mean, I'm fine, I just was, like I said, it's just a conversation we had that I wanted to.
Yes. Yeah, and I want to make sure that happens, and that's definitely something we will be doing. And so, I can,
Maybe I'm,
I can definitely bring things
but if no one
back.
else has, I mean.
Number one, what have we lost? Number one, how do we find out?
And that's why I put that as our focal point for moving into this year, is trying to remediate anything that may have gone. Now, I don't have an issue with what you're asking either, just so you know. I just need to really think about how to write that out. So,
I have a different question. For sub-goal 2, what was crossed out and what was the past year? I know that was secondary to everything happening this year. Would you say that was accomplished this year? I don't know that needs to.
no, we need to revisit it.
Okay, how do we move it somewhere that once we're past this, that kind of back to what Jewel was saying about having some sort of history, but at least, like, I'm totally understanding that didn't happen, but I don't want it not to happen in a year or two when we've kind of moved forward. Because I think it's important, and I just don't want to lose it, and I don't know how to do that.
Aren't we still doing it, where we have to take a step backward because of what we've had to deal with for the last year and a half?
Right, but this was specific, I guess my understanding that this was specific to understanding the
Certain goals,
academic level.
Specific goals to reach up,
I'm sorry, I'm confused.
that we want to raise the level of performance of our students. And then report it according to where we want to take them. But we've had a big step back.
Right, but this was to make sure our academic level of programs that there was some sort of mechanism, and I mean, this one actually does fit the definition of a goal to
You
build
want to
in
make
that.
sure that it shows up on a future.
Yeah,
Okay.
that a year from now, when hopefully this is all past us, that this can be a 2022 goal, and we haven't,
So my
the
best,
wording's nice, it works.
It's not been completed.
Yes,
my best statement for that would be, I need to get it into my notes
okay,
to make sure that we revisit it.
Okay.
So as I rebuild this, because I do different levels of these, I have a draft level, I have a clean level, and I could put an asterisk within my notes
okay.
that says, we need to revisit this goal.
Okay, yeah, that's all I want, I just,
Yeah.
a year from now, I'd like
You don't want
to talk about it, but I don't want it to have
And
to
we,
be
you
this
know,
year.
we may, that's not a bad idea, we may want 2 or 3 items that we keep in note of. The other, I think, is the, some of the trades. You know,
Yes.
we talked very seriously about that, and that got kind of bumped off. And I don't see it on here, but we may make a note of 2 or 3 items that just this year we just are not going to be able to tackle.
Is programs and services talked about in curriculum, or what, is committee, or is this
Yes.
from you and Karen? Okay.
Yeah, it's talked about in curriculum. A lot of the work, though, isn't done by committee.
Right. okay.
Because it's just, when you get to curriculum, it's just
Well, that's why I asked, because I would figure if this was you and Karen working through some of the items. with-
Curriculum did look through the student success goal and
Okay.
program services last week.
Okay,
so.
thank you.
So trades is another
That's-
thing that we'll want
that
to
was brought
revisit
up.
in the future.
Maybe we could just identify as possible long-term
Yeah.
goals or something like that.
I mean, you could put like, you know, I'm inclined to think it would be handy to have it in here, but if you want to put it in your notes, that's fine too. I mean, my thought was you could almost make a sub-goal 4, and it could be, in the following year, add these back into the goals or something, or put an asterisk in this, but.
I think I'd rather do that because that's something that's not measurable until the next year. My evaluation kind of depends on some of these
Time,
things.
please. Yep.
Yeah, so I'd rather not put something in that literally I'm standing there holding the bag
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
for. So,
But if we could at least document it
Yes,
as
it-
a possible long-term goals to be reviewed in the, I
Absolutely.
mean, the 20, whatever, 2022. Right,
so we want to revisit the original goal 2, and then we want to revisit trades, what we're doing in CTE programming.
Was there any, were those the ones that we talked about mostly?
With that being the case, and I know I'm opening a can of worms, anything off of finance or facilities we need to talk about? I think those were pretty straightforward, so I don't know. But I feel like I'm obligated to at least ask the question.
I think it's a good idea, because this year, like you said, everything's still kind of,
Yeah.
the last year and this year, next year, whenever.
And this was definitely designed this way because it will take next year to not just put some of this together, but to actually attack this to figure out where we are at. You know, if we could accomplish this in a year, that'd be awesome. But the first thing we need to do is figure out where we are before we try to build that long. So.
Anything else on programs and services? Okay, on to students.
I will add those 2 to my notes to make sure we get them again in the future. And love that. I don't want to lose track of either one of those.
Right,
so.
but I definitely don't, there's enough going on, I don't want to ask for that now, but I like it for.
Yes. And I will tell you, if we can feather in, we can feather in goal 2 somewhere and end up accomplishing it, I'll let you know.
If you get bored, you get bored and you want
Yeah. Yes, I'd like extra credit for that, or gold star.
Put it in the evaluation.
Gold star.
Okay, so student success goal. Now, this has always been tied to the success factor dashboard. The original concept behind the dashboard, and there are a few that were there for all of those meetings, was to put something in place where we could look at the different mechanisms within the dashboard and put goals tied to those mechanisms to see if we can move needles. Okay, so that's how this goal was originally designed. The original sub-goal for last year was the administration will work with the appropriate staff to evaluate state testing data in order to improve test preparation through curriculum improvement, test familiarity for the SAT, PSAT, and Illinois Science Assessment. Sometimes this can be confused with teaching to a test, but that is never what a goal of mine will be. I believe that what we need to do is just make sure that our curriculum addresses the needs within that test in order to strengthen the student's skills in specific areas. Okay, I don't want to go through and just say, here, keep taking practice SATs. That's not what we should be doing. If we do know that they ask a lot of questions about, well, or if the writing portion of the SAT is tied to, I'm just about to walk myself into a corner here, a specific style of writing, we want to make sure that we train kids on that style of writing so they don't go into a test, a big test like that, with no understanding of how to accomplish that task. Okay, that should be part of our training, and that's what I'm trying to verbalize with that goal. We were able to take the juniors last year did not take the SAT. We were given a waiver last year because of the shutdown in March. All right. Those juniors are seniors this year, and in October they did take the SAT. So we will get those results and we'll be able to compare. The question now is, will our juniors this year be able to take the SAT? Because there are a number of states that are lobbying for waivers to the federal government on all the testing requirements. Illinois is one of them. There is a potential that we'll see that wavered again this year. Okay, so that really puts a hitch in the PSAT, because then that means that the freshmen from last year who are sophomores this year will not have taken the PSAT either year. This year's freshmen will not have taken the PS. So it's hard to kind of follow the progression of the tests. It's designed to be a PSAT 9, a PSAT 10, and then the SAT, so that you can kind of figure out how they're growing as they move forward into. The other thing is the Illinois Science Assessment. The last time we gave the Illinois Science Assessment, it was given to freshmen. No, juniors?
So last year was the first time it was given to juniors. Prior to that, it was given to freshmen for 2 years.
Did they take it last year, though, Karen? I thought they did.
They did take the Illinois Science Assessment.
Okay, they did get that
But
one.
we haven't gotten the scores back yet.
Well, I don't know that they're giving scores because we just happened, the test window was large, and we just happened to get it at the beginning, and a bunch of the schools didn't once we shut down, so they didn't do the Illinois Science Assessment. So,
That's what my hitch was. I knew there was something sitting there that
yeah,
met
so I don't
me
know that they're gonna give us scores.
for the Illinois. So 2 years ago, the freshmen took it. Last year, the juniors were supposed to take it. We probably won't get those scores back, and if they waiver all the testing, juniors this year won't take it. So I guess what I'm saying is that was kind of the problem that sat in some of the language in there.
So the colleges are not waiving the test though, correct?
Some of them are.
Oh, they are?
Mhm.
Oh.
And I mean, even to the point that ISU is no longer taking tests. ISU admits based on a GPA, I believe, which is like 2.7 or 2.8. Yeah, it's changing.
I guess,
So what we saw as a testing structure may become more of an issue for your school report card than it is for the students actually.
And also our documentation of where our weak spots are in remediating the students.
Yeah. So, anyway, it's becoming
So,
an interesting.
all of that being said, is this a realistic goal? I mean, we still are aware, even if our kids are not taking the SAT, we still have some knowledge of what they're looking for, that kind of, I mean, it won't be reflective of how our students did.
You know, to be honest, when I originally kind of drafted this, it was before we found out the state was pushing for waivers. So now I'm looking at this, thinking, I'm not sure what to do with this one, to be quite frank. If you want to put this one on pause for a year, that would not break my heart, because I don't know what we're going to end up seeing. And then the second one was metric that tracks the number of eligible students that take the AP exam compared to the number of students that are eligible for the AP exam. And I will have that to you this year.
They did, that one is completed then.
Yeah, we'll be able to give you those figures. We're going to base it on specific courses, and I'll put all of that in there, because here's the thing, and this is what becomes difficult, and I don't think everybody recognizes this. Every student's eligible to take an AP exam. The question is, did they take the class that prepares them for the AP exam? So we have students every year who don't take, say, Calc 2, but I have test scores for an AP Calc 2 test. We don't offer Calc 2. So what I'm saying is, we need to narrow it down to what we offer and how many of those students are taking exams. So I just need to put that into a window, and we'll get it to you. So that's why I pulled that one off.
So do we have another way we could adjust this, do we think? What is the board think?
Yeah.
So it says creation of a student success factor dashboard. So that implies to me that we're talking about a dashboard that isn't the existing dashboard?
No, that's why, I think this is a charge.
Yeah, I think this would,
The district level goal would be.
Or should it be maintained instead of
Well,
create?
But I think that could be a charge of the, well, I don't know if it's a charge of the curriculum or just,
well, for this year,
we're gonna leave it.
I think that the term maintain would be better than create.
Yeah, it's hard to trade it. Or maybe, yeah.
And then if we go to putting that
Right,
in,
that, we'll discuss whether or not that.
yeah, what that might look like.
And we've talked about this for the last year or two. And I remember Brad kind of weighed in last year on this, because he was one of the, and Gloria as well, one of the originators of the whole dashboard, right? And if we look at the dashboard now for academics, it covers GPA, SAT, and dual credit AP honors. And then there's extracurricular, community involvement correlated to GPA. So, and our last one is 2018, 2019 on the website. So I guess this seems like, the dashboard as we have it on the website seems like a forward-facing public expression of what our students are doing. And it's, I guess what I would like to see is a kind of in-house dashboard, or an in-house recognition that it's useful to gather certain statistics and have them be available for year to year to year so you can compare. Because if you're not comparing, you're not able to understand growth, and we want to measure growth. And the SAT would be one way, for example, but the SAT is extremely inconsistent anymore. And as we reviewed in the curriculum committee, it was the ACT, I don't know what, 4 or 5 years ago. And then they switched to SAT, and then we were worried with a new governor, we might be back to the ACT. We don't have a consistent way to measure what our students are learning and so on. And we're dependent on the state as we have this now, we're dependent on the state. And so, I mean, what I would like, and I know this isn't the year to do this, right? I get that. But I do think that it's useful to have the dashboard on the website with the student success factors. I think that's a nice space to put forward to the community. But what I want really is something that the school uses to recognize when students might need some interventions or help or things that we can work on. And it's essentially a way to look for problems that we can fix as educators, right? And when I say we, I mean the administration and the teachers. I get that. But is it possible to make the student success goal to be, and one thing that you guys are going to be doing next year is really looking at how we've changed, right? I mean, you said this is, I don't know what word you use, but like we've covered 5 years, and the transition team, you say, in this year we've made like 5 years forward, and education's not going to be the same. And we're going to be, and faculty talk about, you know, at the transition, some of the department chairs say, we are looking at doing some things differently now because we recognize there are new ways to do things. So is this a good year to just write a goal that just says to think about how we can best assess students going forward? And you know what I mean? It's.
I mean, that's the only thing I would say is that's taking the assumption that we don't already do that.
But do we? Because
yes, we have an RTI program that heavily does that. We have a number of things that we're pulling data in for teachers to do all of those things. And so I guess I don't want something out there that is saying that we aren't doing what we already are doing. If we need to provide some information to update you on how we look at students and how we handle things. Because remember that whole RTI model that came in a few years ago is solely designed for the purpose of how do you assess kids where they're at, how do you determine when they're struggling, and what do you put in place in order to provide support and services, which resulted in math labs, peer tutors, a wide variety of supports that we currently have in place. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how you do that. What does an interior facing dashboard look like?
Well, I think when we talk about student data, I think understandably people who work in the school get nervous that we're going to be trying to assess and provide consequences or judge people. And that's not actually how good organizations work. Good organizations are constantly assessing and figuring out how to improve. I'm not sure, and this isn't a criticism, this is just, it's more and more we're a data-oriented society and we're understanding how we can use data to move forward. Case in point, with the transition team, we have a lot of students who are failing 3 or more classes, for example, right? And one of the questions that the transition team asked is, how many students do we usually have fail that many classes? We don't know. I mean, that.
No, we do.
Well, the board doesn't.
Well,
The
actually,
transition team, we talked about it.
we have the number of students who now are failing 3 or
No,
more.
we did talk about the number of students who would traditionally be in that. We said there's, and I don't remember the exact percentage, but there's a percentage increase over what it traditionally is. We broke out a couple of sections of students, meaning we took out our kids that were fully remote, and we recognize that there is a higher, that's the highest percentage of kids that are struggling. But even our kids that are here in person, we have an increase in the number of kids that are struggling this year. And it's all tied to connectivity with the school. But,
For sure, yeah.
But we do know what the previous and past data is. And if we need to go through that more strongly, well, we have a transition team tomorrow. We'll add that in, but I know we did discuss it. It's
Well,
just
I don't remember I specifically remember asking what are the numbers, and I don't want to be difficult, but we specifically asked that, and I'm pretty sure Jen can back me up.
Right.
And if
Well,
I'm
then we-
wrong, but it was, well, we don't have the manpower to look and to know, we'd have to walk through each of the courses and figure out how many students normally fail a set course
I
number.
think that's a different question if you're talking about.
I think the question, at least that I had, is let's say we have, I'm just gonna throw out a number, 100 kids in this category now, is that double what we usually have? Is that, so I don't think we got the answer, is that what you're saying? How does this compare to last year? I don't, would have no
let's,
idea. With
let's have that, I mean,
But that's- I mean,
we're
probably
digging
not
into a
trying to-
rabbit hole that's way
Right.
off of
But
board goals.
but that's an example, that is an example of the kind of numbers I'm talking about. The RTI numbers, if we have RTI numbers, I don't know what those numbers are. If the RTI numbers are reliable numbers that we think we can win. I don't know. We are in a rabbit
How
hole.
can you compare last year to this year? I mean,
Well, we're
it's
just to give us an idea, like, as far as, for me personally, how big of a task is it going to be to remediate these kids? Is it 10 times what we're usually remediating? I mean, I think for the board to understand what it's gonna, this is one of the goals. I'm assuming it's a lot more work than we generally have, so I'm guessing it's a lot more. We just, I think what Brian's saying is.
It's a
we
lot
don't
more,
have a-
but it's also not the size of number that I think you might think that it is. Because I think when we looked at it originally, it was a very manageable number.
Right.
I think that's the best way to put it. I don't want to give the false
Right.
impression that this is way out of control. And 50% of our kids, that's
No.
nowhere near where we're at.
And that's not,
So,
and it's,
Yeah.
and the number of kids that are out, and I'm not trying to make that the issue, but at the same time, like the AP thing, like I sense that sometimes people think that I have a huge interest in AP. I do not, I just want to know what the AP numbers are. Like,
Sure.
we as a board have asked for several years, and not a criticism, but just, what are the AP numbers? I can look on the Chicago Public Schools website, and I can know for each school in Chicago within a minute how many students are taking the AP tests there, how many are passing, what percentage of students are taking them, what students are passing them with 3 or more, and so on. We're on the board, and we don't know that. These are really important statistics just to understand how we're doing. And we don't have a way to get that. And that's the kind of data that I'm talking about. So I don't really care. I care about AP, but it's not my reason for existence. It's just, that's a good example of a number that is really not that hard to get. If the Chicago Public Schools can get it, we can get it.
So I just want to enter some, so many years I was on the SIP committee with Karen and quite a few community members and board members. And she had a slew of information that you worked with the SIP committee. And a lot of that information was part of that, but since we stopped the SIPs, what, maybe 4 years, 5 years? Probably been about 3. Because you had a really nice spreadsheet of all the information. So I know it's doable and that they have it, it's just a matter of probably getting it to us. So I know Karen has done a phenomenal job with it, at least in the last 5 years. I haven't seen it since then. I found it very interesting because then you could understand what you're going through. So I think that's maybe the mechanism that we're missing, is something that they're already doing and just not giving it to the board. I think that's what's happening.
I think that's where I'm going with it. I think what I'm saying is we have metrics that we look at. Like you said, any good organization is going to review. And so our teachers should be reviewing annually what's going on in their classes. It should get down to that level, which they do. They look at it, and that's why they're reaching out to kids that are struggling constantly, because they are reviewing what is happening. I think what you're asking for, I do understand. I don't know what the goal would look like, other than you would like to see some numbers. I worry that, who am I building this for? Am I building it for the board, or am I building it for the staff?
Well, it wouldn't be any use if it were just for the board. It would be what the the SAT is a not very consistent means of assessing how we're doing. I mean, we've talked about this year after year in committees. We have no way to understand what growth our students have.
I get that. Yeah.
We just don't know.
Right.
We need to have a way to understand what growth our students are having, so we can tell if we're doing better or not. And then, once we do that, then we can dial in where we're not doing well. We can dial in using that data. That's a really straightforward process, and I don't understand what data we have that we can do that with. if we have data, we
Well,
can lay it out for me, but I just don't see what
So I'll
that
go back
data
to
is.
something you said early on. The number one piece of data we have is grades. Truthfully, are they succeeding? Are they passing courses? Are they learning what they're supposed to learn? So if you're talking about something that's not standardized data, that's what you're going to go back to, are your grades. Now, having said that, is there something else that we can triangulate that against? And I think that's what I hear you asking for, more so than, because there was a triangle, there's supposed to be. You have grades, you have a test, you have like an SAT, a standardized test, and then there's always a third piece out there that just, it's compared against standards is usually what it is compared against. How are they doing against standards? So those are conversations, I just need some time to kind of like figure out what that might look like. This is not the year to do it.
Right.
You will
It's-
absolutely, this is not the year to do it.
And
right now.
back to what I suggested, it's not that I want you to do it.
Yeah.
It's kind of keep it in mind as you look at
Gotcha.
how things are happening.
Okay.
Just keep it in mind
Absolutely.
is all.
But
And-
it's my understanding, and maybe I'm off track, but at that meeting, curriculum meeting, this is what I saw happening. We have to find what data is available and not just standardized test scores. Because they're more and more not being the end-all for everything. I see all kinds of things we're going to be looking at that the staff is going to put together to say, what can we use as documents to really measure how far our students might have fallen down this year with academic progress compared to 2 years ago, not even last year. We lost half a semester last year that wasn't comparable. And that's what I see they're going to be investigating. What's available? What would be good measures of how much they may have dropped in certain areas?
And I think you're doing this. I mean, I know that Mrs. Casulo in the math department is working on improving, adding questions that reflect what the SAT looks like, which makes a lot of sense. It's not teaching to a test. It's just making sure you're covering the brunt of it, right? That's really good. I know, as somebody who teaches students from Washington Community High School, that our writing program is doing really well. And, as Mrs. Stevens said, Mrs. Reiser has implemented a really rigorous program. She had all the English teachers go to and take the AP training because we recognized that our writing could improve. We obviously had some way of knowing how that was because we had an assessment about writing. We then developed a plan. We had all the teachers get the AP testing. That kind of, I just want to institutionalize that kind of process because I think it is really effective. Because now the vast majority of Washington students that I teach at ICC, they're really good at writing. It's just polishing it. You're not building them up. So I think we do things well. I just think that there's institutionalizing that process is what I'm looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I think I'm finally getting closer to being able to express what I want.
and I'm with you on the process.
Uh-huh.
That's where I was struggling.
Yeah,
Just so you know,
I
I was
think-
trying to figure out what the ask was.
Yeah, so next year's not the year to build all that. I just think it makes sense to have a goal that says administration kind of keep this in mind and look for things.
So when
like-
you're saying this, the meaningful data that we have on our dashboard isn't, we need more data than just what's on the dashboard? Internally, not necessarily. Is that
Data
what you're
that's-
asking?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, the data on the dashboard, if it's, I don't know that if we're using the data on the data on the dashboard is very report card-like. It's really good.
Right.
I like it.
I think it's great.
It's not the stuff that you can mine very well to move very far.
And I think when we originally did that, that was all, it was partially for us, but it was partially for if someone were to go to our website and look at our school, you get a general idea of what the typical WCHS student looked like.
Yes.
That was what I understood this to be.
And I
You're
don't
talking
want
about
to change
data
that,
that's-
Joe's kind of.
Yeah, that's useful for the board to make a decision. So when a recommendation comes from you, we've got a good background on it. Because
Yes.
sometimes I think that, you just assume we have this background, but we don't always. So
Not only the board, but for the administration and the teachers to work with that data. And then essentially they just tell us, hey, we've looked at this data, this is what we've learned, and this is what we're doing to address the need for improvement. I mean,
I simplified this very much, but I'll put it in my notes for future, okay? And as long as I'm processed to evaluate student growth. That seems to be, that's a very simplistic version of what you're talking about, but it would include what kind of data we use. It would include how we're determining if we're maintaining the type of growth that we should over years. What we've got to be able to figure out, though, is some comparability.
right, I mean, that's the big thing, and
But that's where we would build.
Does it have to be limited to state? That's, is that only state? Don't we? I see a lot of things that I can make sure students buy here that are happening. It isn't just state data.
Right, right.
I don't think it has to be. It could be internally how we see it.
No, and I think that's, I think you're correct, and I think that's what Brian's saying at the same time. He doesn't want just state data, he wants to look beyond.
I think RTI is a rich quote, right there.
Sure.
So, I'm going to throw this out there. We've heard over the, last 4 or 5 years from each one of the department chairs. Do you suppose that we should bring in Kim or Becky and have them do a presentation on kind of the foundation of the RTI?
We've done that twice, we can do it again.
And I like that idea, but it's honestly not that I want the data. It's that I want the schools to start having, and if you're already doing it, that's great, right? But I want to understand that the school, the administrators and the teachers are using data and gathering the data to be able to do year-on-year comparison of student work and where we can improve. And I think we're doing that a little bit. I just want to maybe
And
gather
you're
what that data is, especially because
Yes.
the SAT is so unreliable.
Okay, so what I need to do, because this is, I need a little time to be able to kind of digest what you're asking for and make sure that I've got it clear, okay? And I'm not going to pull that off tonight.
Right, and don't
I'll be
overbuild
honest.
it. It's-
I just want to make sure, because we need a little time to sit down, kind of talk about what we do already.
Right.
And then I may have questions for all of you to determine, is this the type of data you're looking for? But I do need one thing out of this. If we're going to ask for something like this, I want some clear direction. I don't want to be out there trying to manipulate in space, because that is a very difficult place to be, and I'm always wrong. And that's not much fun on my end.
Well,
No, that's not what I want.
maybe where's the rest of the board on this? I mean, I'm the one who
No,
said.
I think it's a fair point. I mean, I feel like for several years, we're kind of talking past each other here, right? We just want to know what data is out there and how it's being used.
Right.
I honestly, I don't care about setting a metric that says we're here and we need to be there. And I know that's a concern, okay, I get that. I don't care about that. I would just like to know what data we're using and how we're using it. And that's not effectively coming back to the board, right? And so, we told them here, we put in one of these goals, this for this year or year before. What I think is a very simple question, which is, we're delivering AP classes, we have kids taking AP tests, how many are passing the test? I don't care if the number is 10 or 90, I just want to know what the number is.
Absolutely.
And it's that sort of stuff that I think we've just got to get comfortable with talking about. Let's just start with understanding what metrics you're tracking so we understand it, and then we can talk about what we can do with that down the road. But right now, let's just understand what the metrics are.
I think
Yeah,
that's
I think that's fair.
a perfect explanation. Because I do think, and there again, I've said this, it's no different than anybody's job. You just assume like the number that you brought up about, how many people last year were failing.
Right.
It's so commonplace to you every day, you just assume we probably know it, but we really don't.
Yeah, and just understand, we may not know the right question to even ask you.
Right.
Okay, so you tell us what you're doing and what's important for us to know, and that would be good enough.
Yeah, 100%.
Would it-
I don't want to drive it. I want to know that there's a process and occasional report out.
So would,
That's fair.
and I'm not going to, don't stroke out now. I mean, would a goal be something along the lines of when we have, say, our committee meetings, we get a little bit more background? Because I do feel like we go into a lot of meetings with, some meetings we have a lot of background and some we don't. So like when we're talking about a particular subject, maybe just getting a little bit more data. Is that kind of what you're thinking? Or you're talking about,
Well,
sometimes it's not necessary or possible, and I think we're improving all the time on getting that, but.
it's not always possible. I mean, we were kind of talking after the last meeting or something like that. So one example is, when we do facilities things, you guys are fantastic about bringing us data. You know, hey guys, we have looked at our numbers and we're low, you know, we're spending too much money, or our rooms aren't heated enough, and you give us this data, and then you say that we've identified the problem by looking at this stuff. Here's the information that we have that proves we have a problem. We're like, yeah, that sounds like a problem. And then you guys say, well, we want to fix it. We've gone and talked to a bunch of experts, and we have the best product here. Here's why it's the best product. Here's how much that's a bunch of data. And then we're like, awesome, do it, right? But with curriculum stuff, with student stuff, I think what Jen and I were talking about, just it feels like we don't get that. It feels like it's just this. It's hard to, we don't get the, here's why we have a problem, and here's how we know we have a problem, and here's the solution that we've got to fix it. And so I think,
I have to agree with Brian. A lot of, many times in curriculum, it's hard to get the measurable data to be able to come to the conclusion that, yes, we're doing the right thing. No, our teachers need more professional development. No, our kids need writing labs. No, our kids, we're missing, at least the ones that I went to, we've missed that connection of how can the board help you to get to where you want to be, and what can we do to help you? It's almost like, I don't know, I think it partly is, you may feel like we know a lot more than what we do, and so for us to make a decision is very difficult because we don't have the background of it. Is that kind of what you're trying to say, Brian?
yeah, and to be perfectly honest, I feel like sometimes the education piece is like, I think there's a worry that we're going to get in there and meddle with it, or we're going to try to judge people or be critical, and that's just not what I want to do. I want to build and make better. You know, there's not a desire to tear anybody down. There's a desire to say, oh, look, this data shows a problem. How are you going to fix it? And then you build a solution. I don't want to build solutions. I don't know how to run a high school, but I do know how to look at data and understand when somebody presents an issue to me, and to ask questions to see if we can slowly build out that process. That's what I want.
No, makes sense.
So, okay.
That I get, because I think so let's say we want to, okay, I'll go back to something we've already done. We have a math lab. How do we determine that we needed a math lab? What's the data to support that? And then the resolution was the math lab. So just kind of going through the process. I get it. That makes sense.
Uh-huh.
So, to get back on track, is this something we think can be a goal, or is it something we want to put out there as next year kind of thing? Are we going to scrap this student success goal? With the exception of the top part, because if we don't have the SATs, we don't have any of those tests, how can we even, Karen, do you think that's even realistic to?
I'm so sorry, I can hear about half of what you guys.
The sub-goal 1, is that realistic? I'm hearing sub-goal 1 is not a very realistic goal. If we don't have the test, I don't know how we can.
I honestly feel like we do all of these things, and
Anyway.
you heard it all piecemeal, because you said, like Pat said, twice, you said, we don't know the data about this, so then we brought in the RTI people, and we did the data for how we did that, but I think it gets piecemeal, and you're not seeing the whole picture. So I think that's what you're asking for, so as we're sitting here, I've already sent a calendar invite for Friday, just to the people involved, to say, just organize it in one piece. You all have it, but you're not getting it in one piece of paper. And I'll be honest, you're not always going to. With curriculum, you're not always going to.
It's a different animal.
Yeah, I mean, like, with English and the AP thing, what Jen did, that wasn't like we identified there was a problem. This was how we wanted to grow. That's what she wanted to do. So institutionalizing it to that point is not realistic for that one. But the others, I think that, I think it's just getting it organized. It's just, you have had it. You've had it here, and then you had it here, and then you had it here, and then you had it here. some pieces, I think, get lost in the conversation. Like my memory and Kyle's memory of the transition team meeting, I think we both thought that was clearly communicated because we clearly had, here's the typical data for failures versus this year. That was what was in my mind and his. So I think sometimes those things get lost in communication. So we got to fix that, and get it so that it's more organized. That's what strikes me. All of those pieces have been presented, just not in the organized fashion that you want. So I think it's just a matter of getting them organized.
I think there are things we can do to improve.
What-
I will say, I like the concept of the process, so if we're looking to change things, we talk about, hey, here's what we know, here's the data to support what we're saying, here's the general issue, and here's our planned resolution for it. And as Karen said, the difference between facilities and curriculum is there are nails and concrete that go into facilities.
These are students.
You don't have that in curriculum.
Yeah.
So it is a little more difficult to nail to the wall, no pun intended, but I understand what you're saying.
So can this be, so what are we gonna, I guess I'm getting, what are we doing
Hold
with
on,
these?
better, I can be a little
Right.
louder and I'm closer.
Right, yeah.
So the other, no, I know, but I'm not, my voice carries and I'm
You have a
closer.
conflict.
What I think what she's asking is the sub goal 1,
Although that's-
which is PSAT, the Illinois Science, and the SAT. Since we don't think we have those data points, do you think that's realistic for this year, or do we need to scrap it?
I would like it kept on for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is valuable to our teachers, and our teachers are looking at it, particularly our math department looks at it, and they build a lot of their curriculum choices around the SAT in terms of what order are we going to make sure that these things are presented, and what are we going to hit more, et cetera. So we're still going to do that regardless, because that's what's good for our kids. Even though most colleges don't care about the SAT score the way they did when you and I went to college, it is very important for scholarships. And it is something that it is easy to wrap our minds around, if for no other way to explain it than that. Also, the state of Illinois just told us, last Friday, 2 Fridays ago now, we're going to start requesting to the federal government that they do waivers. Whether that happens or not, we don't know. We're fine with it. If we're going to take it, we already have a plan. Frankly, we dragged our feet because we thought it was going to be waived and then it wasn't. That's another show. But, so,
You like the goal?
yeah, I like the goal.
So the goal is okay.
I think the goal's okay.
Did I do a good job
I'm
on
sorry.
yes? Okay.
Yes.
But I like
I
that.
like what you.
No, you're good. You can keep going. I just need
No,
to.
but your input earlier though was really helpful.
I'm sorry, what?
This needs to be here. This is stuff that you are responsible for. I mean, Kyle's fine, but you're the principal.
I already looked at the fall data that we had. Yeah, I mean, and frankly, if these kids don't take it in April, this year's juniors, they're gonna take it next fall. So I'll still be looking at it, it's just I won't be looking at it until next fall. So, yeah, I think it's important to keep.
Okay, I think that was.
So in the interest of time, do you think we've accomplished some stuff? I mean, is the student success goal, in the interest of time, it's already 2 hours.
I had one more thing on student success, but I'm scared to bring it up, so I think I'll wait till next year.
So do you have something you want to change about this?
I think we're
Except for
going
we
to
change to maintain,
Yes.
create to maintain, and then we're going to leave the rest of it the same.
Yeah, we'll just do sub-goal 1 this year. And we may line up the SAT and Illinois Science Assessment, but I think we can keep SAT regardless. Because as Mrs. Stevens mentioned, we do know we'll take it in the fall if we don't take it in the spring. So,
Okay. So we're going to take off the PSAT and the Illinois Science?
no, leave them on
Okay.
for now. We don't know yet until, we don't have waivers
Okay.
from them.
Okay.
So we may end up taking the test. They're actually in our calendar right now as we speak,
Okay.
so.
All right, so is there anything else? And all this other discussion is just more, not a goal, but
It helps. It's talking process as we bring things to curriculum specifically.
okay. Anything else on this?
I have a 30-second thing.
All right.
Last year at the goal planning, we talked about doing the mission and the vision statement. I just want to Jewel and I have not forgotten about it. We've discussed it via email a little bit. We don't want to discuss it tonight, but just, we don't lose sight of it. It keeps being part of the discussion. And as we get some of these other things accomplished, we can maybe do a subcommittee or come up with exactly what we need to do.
And maybe
Kind of
we
the
can
goal
have that
last
as
year,
a
sort of.
brief discussion item on the next board if you've got anything we'll see.
Yeah, that works.
Would that be, just the
Because
progress?
originally the plan was you two were. gonna-
We were the, and that's fine.
And bring it to
And that
the
works too,
board,
but
so,
I just
yeah.
want to put that in another.
I may be wrong. I know exactly what you're talking about. I wasn't aware it was printed as a goal.
I don't know that it was a goal, it was
At
just
one point it
discussed
was,
during
but
that
not-
meeting to some extent.
It didn't turn out to be a written goal,
No, it
but
came
it
up in
was a
the meeting.
discussion
All right.
yeah.
We worked on it a few times back and forth, it's not like we put a huge amount of time, but we made quite a bit of progress with it.
There you go.
And we'll bring it
It's
up.
always a process.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So do we have anything else on the goals?
Not for me.
All right. Brad, you look like one. Okay, so if that, I don't even know where my agenda is.
Exactly. Now it's others.
Okay, so now, do you have any other? All right, if not, I guess I need to have a motion to go into executive session for purpose of collective negotiation matters between the district and its employees of their representation or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees.
So moved.
Second.
Butler?
Yes.
McNabb?
Yes.
Essing?
Yes.
Fisher?
Yes.
Ward? Yes. Knopfinger?
Yes.
Sigmund?
Yes.
All right, now we are in executive session.